So I know that I have talked about this before. It's what I often talk about when we come to this part of Scripture. It's what often comes to mind when we come to this place where Paul is so vulnerable. In the movie Shawshank Redemption, we mostly follow Andy Dufresne, who has been convicted of 2 murders, who is serving his sentence at Shawshank Penitentiary, who learns to work the system, who gets in trouble and gets out of trouble, and who eventually escapes from Shawshank, reveals the corruption of the warden and his cronies, and embezzles a bunch of money from their scheme, and makes his way to freedom in Mexico. But we also follow, a little bit less, Ellis Redding, who goes by the nickname Red, who is played by Morgan Freeman. Don't worry, I'm not going to do an impression. Red is also at Shawshank for a murder. He is serving his time. And after 40 years at the penitentiary, we watch him leave. He's given a suit and a suitcase and a bus ticket. And he heads back out into the world, having gone in somewhere in the 20s or 30s, getting released in the early 60s, heading into a world he does not know. We see him get a job and struggle a bit with the job. There's a moment where he is a bagger at a grocery store and he asks his boss, "Hey, can I use the restroom?" And his boss tells him, "You don't have to ask, you just go." And we get that voiceover in Morgan Freeman's lovely voice of, "I spent 40 years asking permission to do everything. I have to ask permission." And we see him consider what he might do to get sent back. Because while he knows how to live in the penitentiary, he does not know how to live outside the penitentiary. He has a choice in front of him. Do I keep going with this life I don't know, or do I do the thing that will put me back in the life that I do know? He has gotten out of Shawshank. Shawshank has not gotten out of him. And Red is a type. We all know folks who are something like that. Maybe it is someone who's been in prison, who has gotten out of prison, but prison has not gotten out of them. Maybe it's someone who was in the military, and they have gotten out of the military, but the military has not gotten out of them. Maybe it's somebody who's been in a war zone, and they've gotten out of the war zone, but the war zone has not gotten out of them. Maybe it's somebody who was in an abusive relationship, and they've gotten out of the abusive relationship, but the abusive relationship has not gotten out of them. Maybe it's somebody who has an addiction disorder, who has gotten out from under the control of alcohol or drugs or whatever, but alcohol and drugs and whatever has not gotten out of them. Maybe we know ourselves, who have gotten out from under the power of sin and death and everything that makes life less, but who know that the power of sin and death and everything that makes life less has not gotten out of us. So we're at about the midpoint of this sermon series on Paul's letter to the church in Rome, and as I mentioned, we've gotten to this part where Paul gets vulnerable, but a quick recap of where we have been. The problem, says Paul, is that we have been under the powers of sin and death and everything that makes life less. All of the crud of the world that makes life thin and hollow and less than real, true, absolute, honest to God, abundant life. And we've tried to fix that. We've tried to find ways to be righteous. We've created laws and rules and statements and manifestos to help us be better than we are. But the powers of sin and death and everything that makes life less know how to use those laws and rules and statements and manifestos, even if those laws and rules and statements and manifestos were handed down by God from a mountain. There is a gap, says Paul, between being law-abiding and being righteous. So what are we to do? How are we to become righteous? And Paul says, well, we don't. Instead, we have faith. We have faith in God's righteousness. We have faith in God's mercy. We have faith in God's promise, and that faith is reckoned to us as righteousness. And if that sounds easy, don't worry, it's not. It is hard to have faith. So instead, we can rely on the one who had faith for us. Jesus managed to do it. Jesus trusted God. Trusted God even though that led to the cross. Trusted God even though that led to the tomb. Trusted God even though that led to a resurrection. And now, Jesus as Christ sits at the right hand of God, ruling over all of creation, showering it with the mercy that comes with faith. And we are, all of us, out from under the powers of sin and death and everything that makes life less. And not just us, but everyone. And not just everyone, but all of creation. And we don't want to go back. We don't want to put ourselves back under the powers of sin and death and everything that makes life less. We don't want to go back to that slavery to the people we don't want to be. And yet, and Paul is honest about the and yet, I don't go back on purpose. But I know that when I want to do good, evil lies close at hand. I know that when I want to live in real, true, honest to God, abundant life, it feels confusing. It feels overwhelming. And it is so easy to slip back into bad habits, to keep doing the things that I know how to do, to keep hurting the people I know how to hurt, including myself. It is so easy to listen to the whispers of the powers of sin and death and everything that makes life less. Those whispers that are so enticing, those whispers that are so seductive. It is easy to find myself wondering, how do I go back? It is amazing that Paul is this honest about it. Paul, who gets held up as the guy who knows what is going on. Paul, who has been sent to the Gentiles with the good news. Paul, who wrote a pretty good chunk of the New Testament. Paul, who has formed a pretty good chunk of our theology. Paul, who has all of these words to say, and yet, here and a couple of times in other letters too, says, I know how hard it is, because it's hard for me. I am not the person I want to be. I am not living the life that I want to live. And I don't always know what to do with that. There's this phrase, you don't hear it very much in the United Church of Christ, but you do sometimes. It creeps in, gets into things. You hear it every so often, and I hate this phrase. I mean, as a phrase, fine, whatever. I think I hate it mostly because of the kinds of people who were using it around me the first time I heard it. But even without that, I do not like it. It troubles me. Baby Christian. There's this idea that there is spiritual maturity, that some of us are new to faith, and some of us have been at it for a while. And those of us who have been at it for a while are, better at it than the folks who are new. And we need to be patient with the folks who are new, but we also need to guide the folks who are new and make sure that they are doing things right. It's how laws and rules and statements and manifestos start to creep back into things. But the reason that I don't like it, the reason that I'm so troubled by it, is it imagines a world where somebody has it down. Where somebody has figured out how to have faith. Not just a little bit of faith, not just a mustard seed of faith, but real, actual faith. And somebody knows how to follow Jesus. Not just a little bit, but all the way to the cross and to the tomb and the resurrection. And if even Paul is willing to say, I don't have it down, I still get lost, then who are we? Certainly, who am I, but who are any of us to say, I'm a mature Christian, unlike somebody else? See, I will tell you this. All of us, every single one of us, even the best of us, is at most a toddler when it comes to faith. We stand up a little uncertainly. We weigh our balance. We take a tentative step, and then another one, and then tumble forward in a rush, grabbing on to a surface or a person, falling down laughing or crying, and pulling ourselves back up again. We are, all of us, every single one of us, even the best of us, at most, babblers when it comes to being human. We can make some noises, and we have the cadence of the language down. We can use our facial expressions and our gestures, but the words aren't there. We are, all of us, beginners at love. We are, all of us, every one of us, even the best of us, at most, beginners at love. We're trying. And we're doing what we can, and we know that we can do more. And sometimes we fail. Sometimes we fall flat on our faces. Sometimes we laugh about it. Sometimes we cry about it. Sometimes we hit rock bottom about it. Sometimes we are handed that opportunity to give up, but we keep going. That is why I prefer the term, and I've used it so many times, you've heard it before, that is why I prefer the term practicing Christians. We are, all of us, every single one of us, even the best of us at most, practicing Christians. And no matter how good we get at it, we are still practicing Christians. The best basketball players in the world still run drills. The best guitar players in the world still practice scales. The best artists in the world still sketch stuff out and puzzle over whether it will work. The best at everything keep practicing. And we too, no matter how much we have this think that we have this down, keep practicing. And practicing is easy. You do the best you can until you know how to do better, and then you do that. And you keep doing the cycle until you get better and better and better. But you keep the humility of knowing that tomorrow is a chance to get better again. I'm going to use an example. It's an example most of you probably won't know, and I'm sorry for that, but it's the example that I know. There's this saxophone player named Michael Brecker. He's really good. He was really good. He passed away a while ago. He is the guy who saxophone players listen to go, I will never sound like that. If I practiced 16 hours a day every day for the rest of my life, I will never be as good as he was. Ever. If I went back in time and started practicing 16 hours a day earlier every day for the rest of my life, I would still not be as good as he is. He is the guy who you do not take a solo after. And he practiced every day because even he knew he could be better. Closer to home, closer to church, Desmond Tutu practiced every day. Mother Teresa practiced every day. St. Francis of Assisi practiced every day. Paul practiced every day. And so that is what we do. That is the work of being Christian. That is the work of following Christ. It is the now of knowing that we are out from under the powers of sin and death and everything that makes life less, and the not yet of knowing that we are still learning to be human. And that, by itself, might be the single greatest act of faith that any of us can make. The faith to trust that God is leading us to something better, and that while we might not see it yet, while we might stumble on our way, we will get there. And that we can always be more human. We can always go deeper into love. That is good news. We are not stuck where we are. We do not have to worry about how we get back in. Today is a new day. Tomorrow is a new day. And we can keep practicing our faith.